Hello and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today is one of the coolest guests I've had the pleasure of talking to yet. He's the writer of many DC titles, including Midnighter and Apollo, Batman in the Shadow, Justice League of America, Wonder Woman, Gotham City Monsters, Electric Warriors, Martian Manhunter, Supergirl, and so many more. He's also written Crude, Virgil, Undertow, Outlaw Territory for Image. However, he's not stopping anytime soon because coming from Image is Commanders in Crisis, which I believe is out tomorrow, right?
It's a week from tomorrow,
Week from
actually.
tomorrow, okay. And then Aftershocks Kill a Man, and then just announced recently is TKO's The Pull. It's Steve Orlando.
Hey, that is me, and all those things are real, so I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah, I was writing down all the stuff you've written, and I'm like, man, this is far more than I remember. Even though I own like basically every DC title except for maybe I think Supergirl, it feels ridiculous that there's such a huge pile of books in like the last 10 years that you've been just pumping out.
I did move to Boston in that time, so we my rent tripled, and I needed to work a lot more. But I wish I could say that was the sole reason, but it's actually not at all. I would be doing this if I was living in Syracuse and renting a mansion for like the cost of a Big Mac.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's great to be here. I was trying to break in for 20 years before I got into comics. So now I'm in this phase of my career where, you folks are willing to support me. That's the main thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say like, oh, if I see something I want to do, I just do it. Come up when we're in this interview. But the reality is like, if I was just some asshole like screaming into the dark, I wouldn't be able to do that. So really I'm here making a lot of books and the books that I think the world needs because folks are here supporting me as well. So it's a privileged place to be. It makes me as humble as I can be for someone with a social media personality. But yeah, I mean, it's been a surprisingly fertile time after I left DC. Just like when I see a book that should exist, I step out there and I make it. And you guys have been there for me, so I appreciate it.
And I think that's something to say about the people who love your work too. Is like I feel like at this point, especially with the books that are coming out now, how different it seems like each one is genre wise. You literally can write anything that you feel like writing at this point, and your audience is just gonna follow. Because even with your DC work, it's so vast and different tonally, but everything in the core kind of still deals with identity and who you are. And I feel like so are the new books in a lot of ways, at least from what I read in Commanders in Crisis and what I know about Kill a Man.
Yeah, I mean, those are things. I think that certain things are always going to be part of my work. I mean, every author has sort of their hallmarks. Like if my friend Tom King wasn't writing about people staring out windows and crying, like where would he be?
Yeah.
So that's definitely true. But the nice thing about that is my opinions about those sort of concepts are always changing. And that's why more work, the statement is different. I mean, the statement in Kill a Man is different than it was in Virgil. It's different than it was in Undertow. It's different even than it was in a book like Dead Kings, which only came out a couple of years ago. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, there's things that I like to talk about, and really, it's because I still wrestle with them, and I think a lot of people do. So I'm lucky that I'm able to continue to sort of stay, make these statements and say and speak about things through this medium of comics. But at the same time, like it's been more challenging than ever. I've been challenging myself. You listed a lot of things, not even announced, and I can't say what they are. But I'm going to have a YA fantasy book.
Mm-hmm.
Two different YA type books come out in the next year. I'm doing a horror book, which I've never done. So it really is interesting to see how I can sort of funnel the things that are important to me, things that I think should be important to the world through these new genres. And that's been a big push of me ever since I went independent. Like, again, like I no longer do I want to sit here and say like, oh, I really wish someone would do this. Like it goes on my idea board and I find a way to do it.
And that I think that's the most inspiring thing is because I've heard other stories of you talking about how long it took you to break into the industry. So going all the way back to when you were like a kid, what was the first comic book that really grabbed you in any way and kind of shook you as like this is something I want to get to at one point. I want to be the one making these books.
Well, I mean, the first book I ever bought was actually it was an issue of West Coast Avengers, and it's a bizarre thing that I have now memorized what it was, but I have a pretty good memory. This was like in a quarter bin in the 80s. But it was West Coast Avengers 16. And it was called The Tale of Two Kitties. And it was about Tigra and Hellcat arguing over, battling over the Hellcat costume, which might have just been called the Cat costume at that point. I'm unsure because I was two. And then they, of course, get over it, and they beat Tiger Shark by cutting his dorsal fin apart with their claws. And for some reason, I was hooked, And the reason I think is just it was the wild costumes, it was the gonzo-ness, it was the flair, it was the sort of the soap opera presentation of emotions. Like it was just all very bold and wild, and I loved that energy from the start. And I loved comics since then, but I don't know that I knew I wanted to do it until actually probably like 10 years later. And it was actually, I owe that to Electric Superman of all things, because there was an article in the Syracuse New Times about how, Superman's powers were changing, his costume was changing, and it was never going to be the same. Certainly he would never go back to the red, white, and yellow. This was electric shit was here to stay. And so I was like, fuck, I have to get on board. And with the first issue I bought, it was during the time in the late 90s when effectively the Superman books were a weekly. Like there were 4 books, but they were all running one story, and it was by a writer's room. And there was an editorial piece in there about how they came up with his electric powers and his electric costume. And it detailed sort of the collaboration. And that's when I was hooked. When I sort of saw that you could, comics were this sort of, I didn't even have the words for it back then, but now I look back and it was that they were this sort of collaborative, organic thing, where like no one person was doing it, but you were all pulling the best out of each other. You were all pulling creativity out of each other. And now I look back and know that's what it was. But to be honest, when I was 12, I just saw that and I was like, oh, people get to make cool shit and get paid for it. I must do that. And so I started saving cans, which I did for a year. The deal with my parents was that if I could pay for my plane ticket to San Diego, they would go with me because I was 12 and pay for the hotel. So I saved up like $400 fucking in cans and went to my first San Diego Comic-Con, and God help me, asked people how to break into comics. One of my best friends and mentors, Steve Siegel, who created Man of Action, him and Joe Kelly, Man of Action and Ben 10, him and Joe Kelly were on X-Men at that time. They either liked the cut of my jib or took pity on me and started giving me reviews for my scripts when I was like 12 or 13, and it sort of guided me ever since. But it all started both from West Coast Avengers and then Electric Superman.
And like with both of those, you talk about how like the flair of the comic book is what grabbed you, and especially with Electric Superman, the like being able to do, oh man, I can just make up whatever I want and people will pay to read it, is what got you to want to write it. But is there any like emotional story in the comics you read growing up that made you realize, oh, I can do the flair and have the impact at the same time?
Well, the thing is, as I got older, yes, the answers changed. I'm not going to dress myself up like some young savant. Like when I was, 12 or 13 years old, I just liked that anything could happen, and for the most part, usually it was cool shit that was happening. So and I've since, your points of view change. When I was a kid, I guess the best example is like the best when it really works out. Your understanding of work changes, and then it also deepens and it doesn't ruin anything. Like 2 examples of it. Like as a kid, I thought Rorschach was really cool because Wizard magazine told me it was cool that he broke people's fingers.
Yeah.
Now I'm an adult who understands police brutality and fascism, and I wouldn't say I think Rorschach is the villain of that book. He's certainly not. He's not an admirable character.
Yeah.
He's an object lesson, and so in that respect, it changed the way I felt about a character, and it's something I used to think was cool in a way that didn't sort of, I wasn't excited that I used to like Rorschach, and now I don't look at him as an admirable character, even though back in the day, I was just like, oh my God, he breaks people's fingers, and Night Owl, what a pussy, so.
Yeah, I get that 100% with especially the characters.
Well, but as a counterpoint, young bisexual Steve was enraptured by Midnighter because he was both gay and like did not give a fuck. Like the representation that I was getting at that time was totally valid on shows like Will and Grace, but it also didn't resonate with me personally because it didn't really match my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw someone like Midnighter, I was like, oh, you can be like this the way I am, and also you don't have to be this other one way, like when it comes to personality. You also don't have to be a murderous, killing machine with a computer brain, but there's room in between. The
Yeah.
interesting thing about that is like I also loved the Authority back in the day for like, oh, all they do is widescreen blockbusters, cool shit. Then as I got older and you read these interviews with Ellis, and he reveals that the Authority were actually the villain of that book, which now is pretty widely known. In that case, I found the book all the more fascinating, because it basically, I got worked.
Mm-hmm.
It was a book to show our tendencies towards mayhem and overreach of power. And now I find it all the more fascinating to see a team that lives in the gray area, rather than as a kid. Again, I was just like, oh, this is like the Justice League, but so much more badass, you know. And so in that case, like I look back on the characters differently, but it's only enriched my enjoyment of them. And of course, it depends on what you realize about them. But that's all a long answer of, it was a pretty shallow interest. I'm not going to paint myself up like some fucking wizard when I was 12. But, as I grew and became hopefully less shallow, so too did my interest in the stories I wanted to tell.
Yeah, and with like moving on to like Commanders in Crisis, which is coming out soon, and it's also a teen book with, I wouldn't say like there's a gray area yet with that first issue that you let me read, but it feels like there very much could be a super big gray area from some of the characters later on. Did all of these early teen books like Watchmen or The Authority or like old JLA titles, how did they all like kind of work their way into Commanders in Crisis for you?
Well, I mean, so the interesting thing is that in some ways, because I was at DC for 6 years, the books that most strongly influenced Commanders in Crisis is my own work and the work of my peers when I was there. Because a lot of what goes into that book are things that, I wasn't allowed to do when I was at DC, or things that, I got said no to, or I couldn't do because I was working in an established universe. It's not always like someone brings in a hammer and is like, no creativity. No, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it just can't be done because, you're working in a shared universe with other creators, and the revelations you are hoping to have obviously affect other books. So for one reason or another, a lot of Commanders in Crisis was informed by the limitations, either by necessity or for more malicious reasons, of some of my past works, and the victories as well. The things that I learned at DC, I think I'm a better writer after being there and sort of finding out what really connects to people and how you really lure someone in with the story. Because I'll be honest, you were talking about what drew me to comics. Because I'm not a traditional reader, I think that I like things that are, I think I latch onto a concept before, like, for example, an emotional hook for a character. Coming to DC, I realized that was not how most folks function. And so when I look back at my own work, I'm highly critical of it. And I would say that there's a lot of great successes in something like Midnighter, for example, especially the first arc and the third arc. But in the second one, I do think I kind of got lost in being like, well, all people want from comics is cool shit. I can do cool shit. Like, I have the coolest shit around. But I sort of forgot that you need to nest character in that so people know why they give a fuck. And I learned that so well in the 6 years at DC. So like my triumphs, like in my opinion, something like Martian Manhunter also informs Commanders in Crisis, because I wouldn't have been doing this team book the same way. I wouldn't have been doing this. It's not even a team book, this event book. We're essentially trying to do what the Justice League movie aspired to, and launch with an event and then build the world out after that, which is the hope. I wouldn't have done it the same way if I hadn't spent years at DC really learning, frankly, how to talk to readers, because I myself am sort of an impenetrable asshole. And I realized that I have to learn the language of storytelling for a broader scope. Because a lot of people say they're basically like just writing for to themselves, and that's fine when you think like an average type of reader. But that's never been me. So DC really taught me how to still stay on my message, but tell it in a way that was as engaging as possible for a broad readership. So Commanders in Crisis mostly is a reaction to all those books, my failures, my triumphs, and of course it's a reaction to things like, things like the icons, Grant and Howard's Justice League, I actually really love the big, bold storytelling of the minute and a half that Jeff was at Marvel on the Avengers as well. Yeah. So, we're responding to all those things and being informed by all those things, but also the key for me is that we have to be new. I don't love the trend now in comics that are basically we're just telling stories about things that happened 8 years ago or 30 years ago. And in a nutshell, that's not a problem, but we're not really saying anything new. We're just saying, wasn't that great?
Yeah.
And that's not what I think you folks deserve. So in that way, almost everything the industry is putting out informs the book too. I can tell you one thing, obviously we're doing a comic by someone who loves comics and loves the tropes of comics, but motherfucker, I'm going to say something new and have new ideas every issue. And look, some people may be like, oh, this is too weird. That's totally valid. But I think folks deserve new. I don't think they deserve books that are just jerking off 1986. And so that's what I'm here to give you.
And as a reader, as someone who's read comics, basically, I think at this point, my whole life, give or take, and reading most of your DC works, I felt all the stuff that you were writing at DC in Commanders in Crisis, but in a much fresher way because you weren't restrained. Like there was bits of Wonder Woman, there was bits of Justice League, Martian Manhunter, Midnight and Apollo, all in that first issue, but all of it felt fresh. Where a lot of the new books at both publishers kind of feel like, oh, we're doing this plot point again, and like as you said, you get kind of bored of seeing the same plot points. And you're hoping that but you're just still hoping that the next event is something new for you.
Well, yeah, and to be fair, I'm not ragging on the industry as a whole. I think that if there wasn't an enormous market for that content, it wouldn't be successful. So yeah, I think that there's a place for those books, but much like anything, comics tends to be like 180 miles an hour into a brick wall, take a right turn. There's a place for everything, and we can have these nostalgia books that sort of shine a light on those things, but we need new as well. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So that's always something I've liked. Like I love Tynan and Jimenez on Batman right now because it's so much of this is new characters.
Yeah.
For example, and so much of this is just about building up and introducing new players. And maybe they don't all work, I created a bunch of characters for DC, and who knows if anyone will ever remember them, but I tried, and I'm going to keep trying. And when people do, it's great. And I think that that's how Big Two Comics grows. I met Grant. It's crazy the way people think. Being someone who was reading comics in the late 90s, obviously Grant is like, psychedelic comics Jesus for me. And when I met him and I told him that I had used Prometheus and Aztec in some of my work, I was like a little nervous, because sometimes people are a little precious about their stuff. Yeah. And he was honestly so humble and just so gratified that I even remembered, needless to say, that I was reintroducing them and building them up. And to me, those are characters that were formative. So I think people need new, and the other thing to think about when I'm doing with Big Two versus Commanders in Crisis is it may not even take hold until years later. I loved Aztec, but it took me getting in and pushing to have that character show up for it to get a spotlight again. So I think that I want Commanders in Crisis and this world to be basically one. Like I can't stop myself. I'm gonna say what I think about comics as a whole. But at the end of the day, for me and hopefully eventually the folks that we bring in, if we can, this should be a place where you can really just like let your creativity go. You can give people new ideas as often as possible, and that's my real hope for it. Like issue 5 has stuff I know I could never get over the plate at DC, and that's not because they're anti-ideas, it's because they're weird fucking ideas. But you know what? Now it's my book, so we're leaning into it.
And with Commanders in Crisis too, when you read the first issue, you get to the last few pages of the first issue too. It really does feel like a love story of everything that the big two have done in their events, but with just a fresher take on it. And it really is a love story to the comic fan, like the long-term comic fan. So I'm really excited for everybody else to read it in the next week.
I mean, that's what I want. You know, we want to say we recognize this huge legacy, both behind the scenes and in front, you know, and on the page of comics, but and also that we're pushing forward. And that goes with, I mean, from top to bottom. You know, you asked influences. I'm an idiot and didn't mention Thunderbolts. There's probably no stronger influence than Thunderbolts for Commanders in Crisis, because that first issue of the initial Bagley and Busick run was like pre-big internet. That thing hit like a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Nobody knew, you know, and obviously those things will never really be recreated because everybody knows everything these days. But that type of energy and anything can happen is what I want to go for. And we're going to continue to do that, both on the textual and metatextual level. It's important to me, like, I mean, I'm spoiling it for a future solicit, but like, it's important to me, even in our variant program, like each variant means something. And one of the things we're doing is spotlighting artists that I think are foundational that haven't really gotten a fair shake. One of our future variants is going to be by Trevor Von Eden, who's the co-creator of Black Lightning. He's the man of color who co-created Black Lightning, and it's crazy that people are only talking about Tony Isabella. No shade against Tony. Tony's a nice guy, but he is the white writer of the book, and people should be spotlighting the Black man that co-created him with him. And all I can do is what I can do, and that's give him a platform. And so we're doing that. And you're going to see things like that. I hope to get Ramona Fredone back. You know, I got her into Wonder Woman 750 along with Brittany Holzer. We pushed for that. She's probably the most iconic and foundational living female comic artist alive at age 94. And I want to celebrate her. You know, like this is a book that recognizes we're part of an 80-year legacy. We're excited to be pardon me, not 80 years, 90 almost now. And we're excited to be part of it. And we want to push it forward at the same time.
And like, I know Commander's Crisis is out next week, but I actually want to also talk about Kill a Man, because I've heard the backstory of how you kind of came up with the initial idea for the story, and it's based off of a true story. But is there any comic book influences for Kill a Man also?
Comic book influences. It's tough because that's one of those books that, I mean, I largely think is filling a hole that's underserved. You know, there hasn't been a mixed martial arts comic since Heart, which I think was written by Blair Butler, at least, you know, let's say 8 to 10 years ago. I don't actually remember, but it's out from Image, and folks should check it out if they're interested in mixed martial arts. So there's not a huge, although weirdly, I would say like the success of books like Check Please, which is nothing like Kill a Man in implementation, but is a sports book that shows that sports books can be wildly successful, because that's a queer hockey romance, is an inspiration in some ways for Kill a Man, because like I'm a totally different writer. I'm a violently different writer than the creators of that book. But the idea, you know, sports are generally looked at as a genre in comics. And we think that with the right emotional hook, it shouldn't matter if it's a sports book. You know, if I told people it was a mixed martial arts book, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would just like wave off immediately. But if I'm like, oh, it's about this guy who has to work with the guy who killed his dad, you know, then they're immediately engrossed, because how can it even be? You know, the shortest pitch on Kill a Man is it's like Creed if Creed had to train with Ivan Drago instead of Rocky. And they're like, how can that possibly be? You know, so I think that, you know, the inspiration is, you know, this genre, which yes has been shown in Heart and has been wildly successful in the independent scene with books like Check Please. We want to show that it has viability and just tell a laser focused, gripping story that, it's about being a mixed martial arts champion. But in the same way that, you know, a movie like Creed is really about having some sort of goal, some sort of thing you just have to do. It happens to be about boxing for Donnie. But look, I'm a huge coward. I hate getting hit in the face. It's only happened 3 times in my life. but I identified like hell with Adonis Creed
Mm-hmm.
because how many people in my life do you think told me to quit doing comics for the 20 years I was trying to get in? I'll tell you, everyone. My parents, my grandparents, all my friends. When are you going to give up, Steve? Cheer up, kid. Maybe it'll never happen. You tried. So when I see him and nobody wants him to do this thing, which for him is boxing, and he just has to do it. Yeah, I identify like that. I identify with that like crazy, even though I'm never going to get in the ring. Again, coward. But that's what we hope with Kill a Man. Maybe you're not a UFC fan, but you are probably a fan of overcoming your own demons and finding pride in yourself and really being answerable only to yourself and winning according to your own standards. And that's hopefully the way that we get people in on that book.
And that's honestly how you got me into it. Also, how like I went to pre-order is it wasn't because of the original solicitation of it. Oh, it's a UFC book, but it was hearing you talk about the story and what the heart of the book is, and that was way more fascinating to me than it just being a UFC title about showing fighting. And it also made me think about how weirdly Western comics is lacking in the sports genre. Like we have we have Fence. Is it Fence? Is that the name of the book?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a few others, but I always think about, because I read all kinds of comics, like the sports manga that I read that is just abundant over in Japan, and it's not because people like the sport, it's because of the heart of the characters and the story behind the characters. And I really do hope that Kill a Man starts inspiring people to divvy out more into independent sports books and putting like really impactful stories behind a sport and getting people in that way, because I think that's something the Western market could definitely use more of.
Well, I'll tell you, Killaman has been really happy, Killaman's been really pleasing for Aftershock. So I'm actually pitching a swimming book with one of my friends as well as we speak. So hopefully you're right. Two Steves writing this book, both of whom swam in high school, both of whom ended up being huge queers. So, I mean, I don't even know what that book will look like yet, but look for it in 2022 if they say yes, and you will have heard it here first. So we're trying to single-handedly resurrect the sports genre in semi-mainstream comics with a nice infusion of violence or perhaps crime drama. We'll see as the years go on.
And with the poll coming out from TKO, I know that got announced really recently. Can you give us much about what the premise of that book is yet?
Oh, sure. The poll actually started out as it's funny, it actually started out as the thing that Grant did in Green Lantern, but I was working on that way before him. And obviously I'm not Grant, but it started out as like Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans, one of my favorite bizarre Nicolas Cage performances meets Green Lantern. And it was like, what if we had a Green Lantern that was totally corrupt and just like a big time piece of shit? And then you threw a real world ending crisis at him. And that is what you have in the poll. You have a book that essentially is an homage to Crisis on Infinite Earths, but done as a sci-fi book, not a superhero book. So, instead of, the world's superheroes coming together, you have the 13 officers of the Horizon, each of whom have this science fiction prosthesis that lets them manipulate hard heat, which is our mystery energy in the pool, and it lets them play with gravity and do similar things to Green Lantern. But the issue is there's only 13 of them. And much like we're talking about with Kill a Man, it's wrapped around an intensely personal story.
Yeah.
Brenton Dem, the lead of the book, when people discovered the existence of the Undoer, which is sort of my homage to both the antimatter wall in COIE and also Mageddon from JLA World War III. This destroyer is coming towards Earth because it has the opposite net charge of hard heat, and we're abusing this new technology so much that it's just being pulled towards Earth. And once the world discovers this, obviously people go wild. And 1 year before the book starts, the lead is engaged to Guyano Tithe. Her father has started this sort of like Heaven's Gate type cult, and there's a standoff, like a Waco style standoff. Dem hotshots in and blows up the situation, ends up getting hundreds of people killed, and he's disgraced. And the worst thing is that all the media frenzy on that makes the world know that everything about the Undoer is true. So a year later, the book picks up when there's 7 days left until the Undoer comes and the world is going to end. There's no question. And Dem has just completely shit the bed with guilt and self-hatred. The only issue is that then his ex-girlfriend shows up with a box that can maybe save the world. And the question finally becomes, is he willing or strong enough to do a ton more bad things in the next 7 days to do one good thing? And that's, of course, save 7 billion people.
And that sounds honestly like one of the most fascinating things from any publisher right now. And like, do you have like a somewhat release window for that yet, or is that just sometime next year?
Oh, hell no. TKO, it is not like any other publisher. That shit is out next month.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, so they've skipped the direct market. You order directly from them and they do direct delivery, but it will be available. It's in pre-order starting the middle of this month, and then I believe it's out, this is out of my ass, but November 16th or 17th, because I'm not looking at a cheat sheet on my computer. But it's about a month after pre-order start, and they go directly, they're direct to consumer. So it's not the normal, like, you announce a book and then it comes out 6 months later. They announce it and it comes out a month and a half later.
Well, that's exciting.
It's already done. Like, you will 100% get it. They offer 3 formats, which I think is really cool. One of the reasons I want to work with them is that they are doing new things. And you can buy a book as a trade paperback from them. You can buy it in digital, or you can buy it in a slipcase edition that has all 6 individual issues that are quote unquote bingeable, and you get them all at the same time. So we're done. Like, everything, you're going to get the whole book in about a month from now.
That's awesome. I wasn't expecting all 3 of these to be out this year, but that's exciting for me as the reader.
Oh man, and I have a little, and I have my DC Crisis one shot as well. I'm not totally done with them. That's out in December. So I'm all over the place, but you know, that's what's fun about this. That's what's fun about being freelance.
And moving over from just talking about your books to just questions that some viewers or listeners had. The first one I have is from the House of Comics podcast. They're curious, in your opinion, which wrestler's heel face origin or heel face turn story do you think is worthy of a comic book adaptation?
I might be doing wrestling comics, so that's interesting. You should say that. So what do you think that means? What wrestlers, so it's what wrestler's origin is worthy of a comic, or what wrestler's turn? Like, because
yeah, I guess they're like origin of their character, I guess, is the best way to do it.
I mean, if it were me in a modern context, I would love to do a book. I mean, this is the goofiest fucking answer, but welcome to my life. Like, I would want to do a book set in the present where you finally see old Michaels and old Jannetty talking about Michael's iconic, what was supposed to be a heel turn, but was really a face turn when he threw Jannetty through the barbershop window. At the time, it obviously seemed like it was, but now in hindsight, obviously, like, Jannetty crashed and burned multiple times, and Michaels became one of the best of all time in the ring. And also, as people might have seen, like, Jannetty is just batshit insane right now. Like, talking about if he should sleep with one of his cousins, like admitting on social media to maybe murdering a guy. So, like, if you wanted to do like a real, like, 2 old grungy, like, The Prestige meets fucking pro wrestling, it would be about Marty Jannetty and Michaels in their 60s, like, still loathing each other over one's success and one's, like, comically sociopathic failures.
And the next question I have is from Brett. It's about when the first time you found continuity between comics, like the series themselves, and also, like, how important is it to the continuity of a book when you write for one of the big 2?
Well, first of all, it was easy for me to find continuity because when I bought my first issue of Justice League, Wonder Woman was Hippolyta, Wally West had a suit made out of the Speed Force gel because his leg was broken, and Superman was electric.
That's very fair.
So very soon is the answer to that. And it immediately opened up, like, the storytelling possibilities to me, because you could have characters react to these changes in other books. As for, oh man, what's the nice answer about how important it is to me? Continuity when I'm at the big 2 is vitally important to me, but it's a 2-way street. So you can only do so much as one creator, I guess is what I'll say. I always did everything I could to make sure everything I did fit in everything else, and I still do. But, you know, you're working in an office with generously 30 other creators, all of whom have to be on that page. And if they're not, without, you know, and I'm not like painting one bad guy or another. The fact is, if anything happens, you know, like someone is late, there's not time to check something, it's like a cascading effect. But for me personally, it's incredibly important. I try to never actively contradict anything else. And certainly my own books are always in continuity, but I try to be in concert with everyone else. But it can be a huge Rube Goldberg device from which there are multiple potentially calamitous issues that can arise out of nowhere. It can be as simple as a botched deadline or a misunderstanding or a misreading of something. So it's super important to me, and it always will be. But I would say it's never as simple as folks think as well.
And last question from Patrick is there any news on Electric Warriors trade? And also, what are some older comic book properties you would like to take a crack at?
I mean, there's no Electric Warriors. God love you, Patrick. I love that book, but I always look. I'll be honest. There's not going to be a trade, and I say that not to bring you down, but because I try to be someone who always tells my readers the truth, even if it kind of sucks. You guys deserve the truth versus some bullshit, and I would rather not say, "Oh, you never know." No, we know, and unfortunately, the book just didn't catch on with sales numbers to justify a trade. I'm heartbroken by that because I love that book. But the answer is there probably won't be one, almost definitely won't be one. And I'm saying that because you have to know I will always be honest with you, even if it's maybe not the sort of rosy, candy coated answer that folks might want. So I try to engender that. So when I say something good, it's not bullshit as well. But that said, all the issues are out there, and I love that book. Travel Foreman was a unique sort of a comics god on that book, and I'm super, super proud of it. As for properties that I would like to renovate, well, I love The Shadow. Like Batman in the Shadow is probably one of my favorite things I did at DC. It gave me my second collaboration with Riley Rossmo, who is my favorite collaborator at DC. We then went on to Martian Manhunter. That was my golden goose book. Like I could retire after that and be happy. However, I'm not retiring because again, rent and also passion. But I would love a crack at the Shadow on his own. I'd love Miss Fury. In Commanders in Crisis, there's an allusion to June Tarpe Mills and Miss Fury as a character because again, foundational creators that we should be talking more about. But I love that character. I love, so many things in Marvel because I was just in the door before the pandemic. I love Man-Thing. I love Doctor Doom. I love Captain America. Cap is probably my favorite Marvel Comics character and one of my favorite characters in comics. Like most folks, I would love a crack at the mutant characters. But as for older properties as well, I'm looking at a Strikeforce Morituri collection on my shelf, and that's an amazing book. I love also Magnus Robot Fighter. I should say that more often. I actually think Magnus is a super simple but so easy to make good and cool concept. So I would love a crack at that as well.
Do you have a Captain America pitch just like ready to go if Marvel just knocked on your door?
I don't even know if I do. Like, a lot of people love to say that they do, but Cap is so writing Cap is so dependent on the world around him. I think I could whip one up really fast, but to me, I don't fanboy out about much anymore because when you work in a sausage factory, sometimes you don't always get excited about eating sausage for dinner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I will say every single time someone has Cap drop that is loyal only to the dream, I still get emotional. It was the beginning of the Ta-Nehisi Coates run. To me, I'm dating a guy who likes Star Trek and clarinets and doesn't necessarily understand why I get weepy during an episode of fucking, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Yeah.
But I love that character, and I think it's so important that he's essentially it's easy to write him off as a jingoistic character, but the idea that at the end of the day, he doesn't care what anyone says. He cares about the idea is so powerful. It offers you essentially the human risk of a character like Batman because he's relatively mortal, with the fact that he is intrinsically good like Superman. And I don't know, I love that character. I can go on about him. I could go on and on about Cap. So I don't have one like off the top of my head because it really depends on the world around. But I know that whatever bullshit is going on in the world, and the world has a lot of fucking bullshit right now, that Cap is always going to be the knife to cut through it, and remember the idea, and remember that the dream is what's important.
And I think as long as whoever's writing Cap has that in mind, I feel like he's easily one of the best books at Marvel at all times.
I mean, he's the guy that's there, you know. It's so that for me, you know. There are, like, to me, like that moment in Civil War where everything is going on and like in comic book world, the thing that really pisses him off is that he was supposed to be playing baseball with a cancer kid for Make-A-Wish. You know, like Cap makes the time. And like sometimes that's all you need as a human being, to know that someone's going to make the time. I'm getting emotional about it, talking about it right now. So, but no, I think he's a really important character, and hopefully someday, you know. But I love that guy.
Well, Steve, I want to just say thank you again for being on the show. Commanders of Crisis is out next week. Kill Man is out this month.
Honestly, probably November right now.
Okay.
On the topic of honesty, we're running a little behind on that, but it's going to be fucking great, and it should be out in November.
And then the Pull also out sometime in November, right?
Yes, but for sure.
For sure.
The release is probably on the TKO website. That's out, and I'm remiss to not say, just because we haven't mentioned too much, Tales from the Dark Multiverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths is out in December as well. Beautiful art by Mike Perkins. All I'll say is I spent 6 years at DC. The Justice Society was never in continuity. They're by some of my favorite characters. So God help me, I am writing the hell out of them in this book. The conceit is basically, what if Earth 2 survived the crisis instead of Earth 1? And it's a heartbreaking book. You know, these dark multiverse stories, they're supposed to be tragedies. But I'm incredibly happy with it. We got a little bit of hope in there too. I stuck a little in under people's noses. So
and now all I want is a JSA like maxi series that's in continuity by you.
I would write them. I mean, just Wesley Dodds. You know, you want to talk about characters I've never written, like the original Sandman. I mean, look, Sandman Mystery Theater is one of the greatest comics ever written, by Matt Wagner, Siegel, and art by Guy Davis. I love that book, and I hope that for on the topic of continuity, like, I hope everyone finds things that they really, really enjoy in that one shot. I know I had an incredible time getting to write characters like Alan Scott, who I never thought I would get to write. And yeah, I mean, it's a dark multiverse book. It's going to be, things are going to be rough. But at the same time, I think having that sort of like, if you've seen in the other one-shots, they all sort of exist in that last minute where, like, you know, the fuse is right before the end when things blow up, and like that's where it picks up. So it's like, you know, things are going to go badly for your heroes because it's the dark multiverse, but at the same time, that's when they are their truest selves, and that's where you get the rawest, realest character out of them. So in that same moment of crafting this tragic circumstance for the Justice Society of Earth, I found a lot of really sweet and gripping moments with all these characters. And look, I got to write the original Superman and the original Lois, just empowering each other and being in love. So I hope you guys check that out too.
I can't wait for that. And you can follow this podcast on Twitter at comicbooksmatterpod, Facebook at facebook.com/comicbooksmatter. You can email me at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. If you have any questions for guests, stories about how comics impacted you, or want to be a guest, you can reach me out. You can reach me at all those. Please rate and review wherever you find the show and share with a friend. And the logo for the podcast is done by my friend Steven. And the theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. And always remember, be kind to one another.